So, welcome to Mysterious Goings On. I am your temporary host, Brian Hutton. And the reason I'm your temporary host is I am joined by Alex Greenwood. And so I've turned the tables on Alex. He interviewed me earlier in the season. This is a season really focused on creativity. And so I've turned the tables on him and wanted to interview him about his creative process and about the pilot series of books, which are now celebrating their 10th year in publication. And so we're talking a little bit about some of the events that inspired some of the characters in the books, as well as his creative process, and then also announcing an upcoming John Pilate mystery that will be released here at the end of October on Halloween. So welcome, Alex.
Well, thank you, Brian. And I might say you're doing a great job sitting in my chair. And
Thanks.
I'm having a lot of fun with this. And thanks again for the idea.
Sure.
I think we mentioned it last time. It's like I didn't go to Brian and go, hey, interview me. It's just he just organically said, well, look, man, I'd love to talk to you about what you're doing after we talked. So it's been fun, and I also appreciate the listeners' forbearance because I tend to blather, but I get excited about these topics and just go.
Sure.
And there's a lot of it's been, if you listen to the last week, it's kind of a rich tapestry of stuff that went into the formation of the pilot series.
It is, and for me, having read the books, and I think a lot of the listeners have read the series. A little peek behind the curtain on the process, and I think is really fun for me. I thoroughly enjoy that because you honestly do something that I can't do, certainly not as well as you do, and so it's fun to see how you go about it. So,
well, thanks. It's really just a matter of practice. It's just. I really do believe that you're born with a certain amount of innate ability, but it's the practice. It's the I'm not as glib as Gladwell in saying if you do it for 10,000 hours, you're a pro, but you do it enough and you get better. So I thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Awesome. So last episode we talked a lot about the original event, the murder-suicide at a college, and that was some inspiration for you. But strangely, that event happened in 1950.
Right.
There was a similar event, maybe not similar, but just as shocking to the university and to the community, event that happened much more recently.
Yeah. I went to work at Peru State in 2003. I got hired by this very charming man. I got called up, as we mentioned in the last episode. I had a lot of things going on in my life, and I was ready to get out of town. And I had basically applied for this job. I think it was on like Monster.com, and I got pulled out of the stack on that and asked to come up. They flew me up to interview.
Wow.
From Oklahoma City to flew into Omaha, and then the assistant to the president, a lovely lady, she picked me up and drove me in, and I met with this gentleman that evening at the Lead Lodge in Nebraska City, beautiful place, and he said, "I'm drinking wine. I assume you are too." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. It's kind of a job interviewee kind of thing to not do." He goes, "Really?" And he just looked at me, and I said, "Okay, I'll have some wine. How about a cab?" And so we both drank Cabernet. Talked. I was immediately charmed by this gentleman. He was fairly elegant. He had a bit of an everyman thing going on, but it was kind of under a veneer, though, of every man made good. Does that make sense? Dr. Ben Johnson. He told me about his life a little bit and about what he's doing at Peru State. And basically, what I learned that day, and then the next day when I spent literally all day in committee meetings, and it was like I lost my voice by the end of the day of all the people I had to meet, and I had to go do panel questions. I don't know if you've ever interviewed for a job at a university.
Sure.
Yeah, right.
On both sides of it. So I conducted some when I was student body president.
That's right.
When they were hiring when I was in undergrad. Yeah.
Right. So and it's grueling. I knew pretty much that I had the boss's seal of approval. I think by midday, it just seemed like the questions got easier, and as I fatigued, I felt good about it. But I learned that this gentleman, this school was in trouble. This school is perennially in trouble. I think like a lot of you and I went to an undergrad school similar to this one in Oklahoma, a little more accomplished, but similar in the sense that it was always under the gun with budget. People always wanted to close it because it's liberal arts. And Peru State was originally a pedagogical facility or institution, which just means they taught they taught people how to be teachers. Then they expanded to a more liberal arts role, but they were always under the gun. And we talked about last time about how in 1950 the school was under the gun. Well,
right.
They brought Dr. Johnson in like a year or two before I got there. So this was, I don't know, just a little after turn of the century, I think. And he was already well on the road to turning it around, and he was exciting, and he had an energy about him, and I wanted to be part of it, and I wanted a job, and I wanted to get the hell out of Oklahoma. So it all worked out. I got offered the job.
No offense to Oklahoma.
Well, it wasn't Oklahoma. It was just my circumstance in Oklahoma. That's what I meant. But I remember I got the phone call when I got home, like the afternoon the next day, and it was Dr. Johnson, and he's like, I want you to come work with us. We were super impressed, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, can I think about that? Because I think you're supposed to think about it. You're not supposed to just say yes right away.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
And I told him that, and there was a pause on the phone.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, is that okay? And he goes, well, I just assumed that you were as excited about us as we were about you. And I said, oh, hell, all right, Dr. Johnson, I'll take the job. Can you, we worked out he laughed, and then but he had me there. He was just really good. And so I went and worked there. I was his assistant on public affairs and marketing, and I did marketing and public affairs there, and his director. And as we mentioned last time, I was in the same building where all those murders took place, 30 plus years before.
Right.
It was a great working relationship because I felt like I was truly his right arm in a lot of ways. Not for everything, but for those areas, he counted on me. He trusted me. Things went great. The first year and a half, we instituted online learning, which most schools had not done yet. You folded that in our efforts. We had like a 19% enrollment increase. It was outstanding work. So it was really great. And I loved the job. I missed my friends and family back in Oklahoma and stuff, but I was having a blast just getting paid to do something I was good at and meeting new people and just having a new experience, right?
Sure.
Which forms this basis for the Cross Township. Peru, Nebraska becomes like the inspiration for Cross Township. So Dr. Johnson, there's so many things I could go into with him, but about a year and a half in, he just started turning a little bit. And I'd seen him kind of turn sour on other staffers. And I started noticing he was kind of digging at me and sniping at me about stuff that didn't make sense a lot of the time. It was like maybe I'd done something mildly wrong on something, but it wasn't like a job killer type thing, but it started to get more and more like that. And a little verbally abusive at times. And I was just like, wow. And I kind of talked to him. I said, what am I doing? And he would just, long story short, he would just kind of start doing the mind game kind of thing on me a little bit. I could see this because I'd seen him do it to others. And he started seeing people I was friendly with on campus and then started saying, I think you spend too much time with them. I think you need to not have lunch with them anymore. I worked really well with somebody at admissions, and and he started implying that I was trying to do something with her inappropriate. He started that kind of thing. And I was starting to feel very isolated, and I was a little fragile emotionally after going through all this stuff I'd gone through before I got there. Deaths, a couple of deaths, near-death experience for myself, loss of status, loss of an election, all these things, and I was isolated.
But add to that, you were also physically isolated, being in a very remote, very rural kind of atmosphere, away from all friends and family.
Right. And literally isolated by the weather a lot. When it snowed up there, you live in Chicago, right? I mean, this was the first time in my life I'd experienced 4-foot snow on a regular basis.
Right.
And and this little tiny town, you get socked in, you're socked in. And these are very hardy people who are used to this, but they just understand when the snow flies like that, we're stuck. Better have some food stocked up, or trudge down to the one grocery store that's actually about the size of a Quickie Mart, or maybe the Casey's, it's famous for pizza, and that's it. And cell phone service was kind of spotty, so the phones went down. You were it just really was isolating,
right?
And I started seeing him, and looking back, I noticed he was doing a lot of isolating things to me, isolating my relationships. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, came to visit, and he was trying very much to talk me out of dating her, and he wanted me to date a gal who worked at the foundation. So much so that he was pushing me to ask her out, and I just couldn't do it. She was very attractive, very nice, but I had nothing in common with her. But he was pushing me constantly, and he was like, "Oh, well, Stephanie's nice, but you should you should start dating this other person." I was just like,
right.
Okay, but he'd do it kiddingly. But, when your boss is kind of there and he's becoming less a boss and more kind of a king to you in a lot of ways because he has all this control over your life and all this. So that kind of behavior. And he would say things to me about other people. And I'll never forget this. He once told me, we had a lot of time together in the car or just in the office or whenever, or we'd go out to dinner every now and then. I'd say, "Oh, it's a shame about so-and-so moving on." Somebody who ostensibly either quit or got let go. And he said, "Well, I'm of the mind that people are like newspapers, and when you're done with them, you just throw them away." And then he kind of had a little bit of a rueful laugh, but I don't think it was. I don't think he was trying to be funny. And I was like, "Whoa, okay." But by the same token, everything was going great for the school. We were achieving, and the school's budget pressures were going away, and the senator, he was the darling of state senators, and people talking about, "Oh, this is the guy who gets it. He saved the school, and he created some brilliant stuff." And I can't take that away from him. I cannot take away any of those achievements from him. I can't, because he did some things that put Peru State on the map. He was a visionary about online education. Everybody laughed at him about online. They're like, "Oh, I even taught online for a year. I taught marketing." So I was like, I knew then. I was like, well, I think this is a good idea, and I really believed in it, and that's why our enrollment increased. And now look, everything's online practically. Not everything, but you know what I mean. It's ubiquitous. These things were happening, and I remember socially though, he was just a little different. He was a little off. I mean, we had a bowling league. Yeah. And it was me and a couple of dudes from the school. And I just remember this is that I was the worst guy on the team, but that got me the MVP trophy because my handicap saved the team. We won the championship. But I remember, like, when you get a strike and you would do a fist bump to everybody. Ben really hated that. Dr. Johnson did not want to fist bump anybody. And he said repeatedly, "Why do we have to do this?" And he was irritated. I think there was something about it that bothered him. And I don't even know what that means. I just remember that. Looking back, I realized how inappropriate some of this behavior was. Receiving gifts, like he'd give me, like he loved to collect watches, timepieces, nice ones. He'd buy them on eBay and stuff like that. And I always liked good watches, but I didn't really have any good watches at the point. And he gave me like a couple, and I just was like, "Well, thanks. I can't accept this, but thanks." And he's like, "Oh, of course you can't take it." So he would do all these kinds of things. I'm trying to just kind of lay this out for you a little bit to let you know where he was. And so he had his really great side. I hate to be so glib as to say Jekyll and Hyde, but it was very much. But after about year and a half, it just started to get worse. I just remember he was brittle about anybody getting more attention than him on anything, which is also kind of not a good thing for people with certain personalities.
Right.
We were at a state college meeting, and it's the meeting of the three colleges. Peru's one of them, Wayne State and Shatter, and the other two. And as I recall, we were in a committee meeting or something, but somebody, a third party who didn't work at Peru, looked at our enrollment numbers and our marketing and said, "Oh my gosh, we're going to have to steal Alex Greenwood away from Ben."
Right.
That was it. It seemed that from that moment on, I was no longer the fair-haired boy with my boss. I was apparently somebody who was a threat to my boss. And even though I was helping him and just doing everything I could to make him a success and make Peru a success. And he changed. He was very cold to me at that point, and he would berate me and behind closed doors. He would criticize my job performance. He brought me in one day, and he had a few just, I thought, silly things. He says, "This is going in your record." I was like, what did I do? He goes, this, and that. It was just all this stuff. And he knew how psychologically I was already feeling isolated, and I was frankly depressed. The weather, I think I had a little bit of seasonal affective disorder and at times going on. I can just remember he did all these things. He built me way up, and he read this newspaper. He got everything out of me he could get, I think. And then he started finding ways to tear me down to get me to leave.
Right.
So almost 2.5 years in, I couldn't take it anymore. I mean, it was literally every day was like, is he going to yell at me or is he going to pat me on the back? Is he going to tell me I did a great job or is he going to tell me not to eat lunch with my friend Les in the cafeteria anymore? You know, is it this? Is he going to accuse me of trying to sleep with somebody in a different department? Is he going to do, you know, all these things? And I decided I got to get out of here. So I started looking for work in Kansas City, and Stephanie and I talked about it, and she was in Kansas City, and I let it slip who I thought I could trust, who was probably just as scared of him as I was. So she kind of, in my opinion, toadied up to him and said, well, hey, Alex just told me he's looking for a job. So I got called in the next day by Dr. Johnson. He said, here, you're looking for work. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, let me just make it clear to you. This was like, I think August. He said, if you don't have a job by October, you might as well just go ahead and walk because you'll be fired at that point.
Wow.
Completely illegal, by the way.
Yes.
But it was just me and him in the room, and how could I prove it? And I was just like, well, okay.
Right.
Well, fortunately, within a couple of weeks, I had a job. I was vice president of a TV station in Kansas City, so I was on my way. So it's further proof, by the way, that I was very good at what I do, and obviously
Sure.
He just wanted me out of there. So this is the thing. So then everybody knows I'm going. So I think I'm leaving by, October, November, I'm leaving. Like before I go, Dr. Johnson has a going away dinner for me at a local restaurant. And I didn't want anything to do with him. And he was all patting me on the back and glad handing and aren't you great? And all these people there. And they gave me like some going away stuff. I don't remember, but it was just as if, oh, this is our wonderful hail fellow, well met. He's done so great. We're going to miss him and all this. It was like he was like doing PR with everybody else, I guess. But in a way, I took it as him basically saying, screw you, by the way. It's like he looked me in the eye, shook my hand to send me away. It's like, this is what I do.
Right.
I felt it was very creepy.
So what year was that?
That was late 2005.
Okay. So shortly after that now, there are some things going on in the background.
Right. Well, so I go away, and I'm at the TV station, and that's 2005, and I hear some things here and there, and then I hear that, oh, he's going to retire in 2008, and he retires in 2008. And I think, well, you know, son of a gun, he did some things I don't really appreciate, but you know what? Ultimately, complex personalities are often incredibly good leaders, and he did a really great job with the school. And it's a chapter of my life that's over. It was hurtful in a lot of ways because I made friends for life, I thought there, and I thought I'd done such a great job, and I was liked. And it took me a lot of years to realize that all those things were true and that this wasn't about me. It was about him to a large degree. I mean, I wasn't perfect, but you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I'm hearing that he's consulting, and he'd raised a lot of money for the school, so he had kind of been given a really nice role with the foundation to raise money. I think he was getting we'll find out. He was getting a nice compensation package. It was kind of a deferred compensation package and some stuff like that. That, by the way, now is illegal in Nebraska. Anyway, so we get to around spring of 2010, and somebody who I used to work with at Peru calls me and says, are you sitting down? I said, yeah, I'm sitting down to lunch. What's up? She says, well, I just need to tell you something. Ben took a job at a university.
At Fairmont?
Yeah, at Fairmont State. And it was just announced in March. And I'm like, well, that's great. And this was like late April or early May. And I said, well, that's great. I expected he would take more jobs, although he was getting up in years. And I don't know why, but, I guess he needed the money. And she said, well, the Attorney General of the state of Nebraska has been looking for him and basically is going to file an indictment. And Ben took his life. Ben took his own life. The press release at Fairmont State said that he accepted the job in March of 2010, and by April, back to another April date, just like 1950, Ben basically, what was happening was they found out he had been embezzling.
Right.
I don't.
So that was the bookstore funds, correct?
Right, bookstore funds, and he had been. And I'll just say it. This is from the Lincoln Journal-Star. The former president of Peru State College apparently used about $43,400 from a university-related account to pay personal bills, State Auditor Mike Foley said. Ben Johnson, who left the college in 2008, also didn't reveal a felony conviction and misled state college leaders about his previous employment when applying for the presidency at Peru.
Right.
He committed,
and he had put it on the previous job's letterhead, even though he was
been fired.
No longer working there. Right.
Yeah. He was basically paying off thousands of dollars to his American Express account for clothing, for food and meals, for home supplies, travel, including airfare, motel, and a cruise. They did not appear to be related to Peru State activities. President for 9 years, from 99. Okay, it was 99 until August of 08. He was living in Florida since then and was recently named an administrator at Fairmont State. In addition to his apparent misuse of college funds, the staff also discovered he did not reveal a 1989 felony conviction in California where he applied for the Peru job. He, as you said, he also used letterhead for his resume, cover letter from a college where he was no longer employed.
And then add to that that deferred compensation package. So that was actually even larger and stranger, I believe. So he had managed to get nearly $500,000 in deferred compensation
that they canceled. Actually, they caught the deal, and it was supposed to be that. Yeah, he had negotiated that. Yeah, and the thing that gets me is, he didn't reveal this felony. He made an untrue statement or omission to state material facts to investors in a scheme, and he spent 9 months in a California county jail. I mean, wow. 9 months in jail. His cover letter seeking the Peru State job was on Thomas College letterhead. He had signed the letter as a vice president at the school, and he had been terminated from Thomas College in Thomasville, Georgia, 2 months earlier. Mm-hmm. He had later filed a civil suit against Thomas College for breach, and the school responded that Johnson misrepresented his qualifications in applying for the job. The suit was dismissed 4 months after Johnson was hired at Peru. Yeah, he failed to disclose more than $450,000 in deferred comp.
And that led to... I would jump ahead just a little bit, just to kind of tie a bow around that. A state law, LR 431, that the state of Nebraska no longer it requires that all that type of compensation be revealed and out in the open. And I have not read the law in its entirety, but I think the regents or others need to be aware and approve of any type of compensation of that kind. So.
Yeah, and perhaps I think it probably also means that a lot of my former colleagues at the Nebraska State College system were looking a lot more closely at resumes and checking criminal records. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean,
E-Verify people.
This guy this is a convicted felon. This is a former convict who has basically charmed his way into a position of authority. And he clearly, as you said, exhibited some pretty criminal and... I'm not going to say sociopathic, but I'm going to say some antisocial behaviors.
Yeah, and certainly, questionable history.
Paul Fell, who was president of the college alumni group, I'd met Paul a few times. He was a Lincoln cartoonist, a Peru graduate. He said the guy just did miracles down there. He took the place and turned it around. The former chancellor of the college said, "I'm sad that it turned out this way. That would have been a very good legacy is tarnished." Yeah, but here's the thing, too. The man was very skillful at turning away people who helped him achieve all these things. So I have to wonder about him. Did he turn away and start scaring away people who perhaps had, and I'm not being aggrandizing here, but who had stronger personalities and who could threaten him in the sense that if they found out what he was doing, they would have the moral fiber to report it and not just cower? If I found out he was embezzling, I would have gone straight to the cops about it. I mean,
sure. He seemed to maybe block relationships that might, since each person at the university has one piece of the puzzle.
Yes.
He may have blocked some of those or tried to frustrate some of those relationships, knowing that if two or three got together and said, "Oh, well, I saw this piece and I saw this piece," that you might be able to piece together even more of that activity as well.
I think he ran off a lot of good people, not just me. And again, I am not perfect. And again, there were probably some aspects of my job I could have done better from time to time, just like anybody else. So please don't anybody think I'm sitting here going, "I was perfect and he ran." But this guy did some stuff There were other things I'm not going to go into. There's rumors and stuff like that I will not go into on this thing out of respect for the people who loved him. Mm-hmm. But I believe a lot of those rumors because now that I in retrospect, put the pieces together, he did some really questionable things, obviously, and not just at Peru. Again, this is an ex-con. This is a former felon who basically got in trouble for, I think, defrauding investors.
Right.
And then he fraudulently attains more than one job because of his credentials, and then because he doesn't talk about his past, and he walks into this job at Peru. So it's like some people are like, here's a parallel. Well, the economy's so good, so we can forgive all the other bullshit that the president's doing, right? It's like, no. Right. Either we're a moral and just society, or we're not.
Sure.
So, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little worked up because this was a two-sided of the coin thing for my life. One side was like I broke away from everything and I started over and I killed it a year and a half or so. And then, frankly, through no fault of my own, I was shown the door.
Right.
And it breaks my heart because, frankly, I felt like I could have had a whole new career. In fact, I'll tell you this. You know what he did do? He did some wonderful things for me, too. He wrote me a great letter to get me into the executive MBA program at University of Nebraska at Omaha. I got accepted. I was going to go. This happened a few months before the incident of me being praised at a meeting.
Right.
And then when he started turning on me, I was like, there's no way in hell I'm staying here, and therefore not going to go spend $50,000 on a executive MBA at UNO. So he would do these things, and he would tell me, he said, you could be a college president someday. He said, you could run a small college. He said, you got what it takes and all this stuff. And then I realized, of course I could. In his eyes, of course I could,
Yeah.
But I just remember he had plenty of enablers on staff, some people who I'll never forgive for the way they enabled him. But then he had some people who I remember who questioned him, and they were shown the door, or their lives were made miserable. I wasn't the only one. And then there were some people who legit were dead weight, probably needed to go or needed to have their roles changed, and he did that too.
Right.
So I don't mean to beat a dead horse. I just want to lay this out. So if you go back to 1950, you have this horrible tragedy.
Right.
Where somebody who's got issues goes in a very bad direction. Then you go all the way up to 2010. Yeah. So you got 60 years here, a span of 60 years where it ends. The punctuation is sad, and sadly the punctuation or these things are gunshots. And listen, as much as I despise a lot of the things Ben did to me and said to me and the hurt he caused me, I, believe it or not, still have a lot of respect for his achievements, and I have love for him in some ways because he did, no matter what at the ultimate end, he did help me kind of get to where I needed to be at that time in my life and introduce me to some other wonderful people. And we didn't even get into how this guy, by the way, talked himself into being a nationally known lottery expert. I mean, we don't have time for that whole story.
And the book writing, yes.
He wrote lots of textbooks. In fact, I'm sitting here looking at Stirring Up Thinking, his critical thinking textbook, which I think is a pretty darn good textbook. I mean, but he's fascinating in that he did. I'll just tell you real quick. He told me one day he was like, and this was a guy, the story he always told me about himself was he grew up on the streets of Detroit, and this is what he said. This was the lore he established. He said, well, I was in gangs, and I get into knife fights, and then I got in front of a judge who said, you can either join the army, go to jail, or go to college. But you got a choice, or it was something like that. It was one of those kinds. It was just right out of, and
right.
Anyway, so obviously the path he took, and he would always kind of jokingly allude to all his friends back in Detroit. If people, he would go, I got to introduce so-and-so to some friends I have back in Detroit. And I was just like, okay, whatever. I never took that too seriously. But he told me one day, he said, he says, I decided I would become an expert on the lottery. And he boned up on it, but he would just gleefully told me how he started writing this column for the local paper, and then it got syndicated. And he's like, and I don't know shit about the lottery, but I pretended like I did. And he's written some books. It's just typical behavior of this kind of personality. And again, I'm not diagnosing him. I can't. But I mean, do I need to paint a picture? I mean,
yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting.
So and I don't mean to continue to blather on him. So I won't, other than to say there is a villain in Pilate's Cross who hangs around for a couple of books, and he was the president of Cross College. But is that Ben? Well, no.
Right.
Is he inspired by Ben somewhat? Well, I would imagine so.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So the Peru State community,
Mm-hmm.
how did they react? You said a little bit about there was some shock there, but there was also, I mean, some pretty nefarious activity was being revealed by the state attorney general as well.
And the auditor too. And I think the people I talked to, it was a mix. It was like you heard some of these quotes publicly, because he did. Listen, if that college dries up, that town dries up and blows away. You know what I mean by that. There's nothing economically there other than farming.
Right.
It was a love-hate relationship, because I think a lot of them, and this did translate into Jack Lindstrom a little bit, that the town thought, I think a lot of people in town thought he was kind of full of himself and blah, 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 but they couldn't argue with results, because a lot of them were farmers, but their wives or their husband or their kid worked at the school. And the school definitely kept the gas station open and the grocery store open and the bank and all that. So it was a mixed thing. But I'd spoken to some other friends there who were bitter and said, that's all we need in this town is this. And I even had one say to me, after the thing that happened in 1950, and then we worked so hard to get past that, as a town, and then we get up here and one guy said, this jerk comes to town and does this, and
it ruins it for us.
It does. Well, and then a few years later, there was, and I think it's still unsolved, there was a student who was apparently has disappeared, was likely murdered, and that it's just, there's some bad luck going on there. I don't believe in curses, and I don't believe in that. I think statistically bad things happen everywhere. It's just when it's such a small, concentrated place. When a big personality comes to town and does big personality things, good or bad, it has an effect on people.
Right.
I've never talked publicly about this until now, but he's been gone now for 10 years.
9 years.
It'll be 10 in spring. And he had family and he had friends. And I hope if they're listening to this, they don't think I'm trying to be malicious. I held my tongue for a long time, but the man did hurtful things. And we all do hurtful things in our lives, but he did hurtful things that legit that hurt people's careers, that messed with their brains a little bit. So I just felt like I should say it. And I hope anybody who wants to defend him, feel free. I don't really want to argue about it. It's how I feel. Right. I'm not saying anything here other than my own experience that isn't verified in the newspapers. I went and visited there a few years ago on my way to a book signing, and I ran into a few friends. It was great. I hope, though, that people, when they see his achievements, like the little schoolhouse he remodeled, that was one-room schoolhouse. He had this whole, he moved a schoolhouse to campus, and because it was a teacher's college, and he redid the school. It was beautiful. I hope when they look at the ARC, the Academic Resource Center, which is just the jewel of Southeast Nebraska higher ed, I hope when they look at that, they'll think fondly of Ben. Because I try to. I mean, it's obvious listening to this interview, I have mixed emotions, but you can't argue that he did some damn good things.
Well, that's good. That's good. And I think we're all multifaceted as people. And all of your characters, maybe an interesting segue into antagonists. All of your characters are multifaceted. No one is all, or very few, all bad or all good. We're all struggling with our past, in internal demons and those type of things. So speaking of antagonists, who's your favorite?
Oh, wow. Oh, my God. Thanks. And first of all, thanks for calling him antagonist, because villain is see, if you'd said villain out, you would have been contradicting yourself, because to me a villain is boring, a black and white, just I'm evil. Well, that's not interesting.
Yeah. Come on. Twirling a mustache.
Because nobody, no good villain thinks they're really being villains. They think that they think that evil things they do are a means to an end, and it's a good thing. And even if that good thing is only to feather their own pockets, or get power, or they're like, look, sure, I pocketed some 40 grand worth of money, but look what I did for this school. It was worth 10 to 100 times more than that in value. But so so in 7 books now, there's been, out of the antagonists, well, there's been Jack Lindstrom, who was the president, and if you haven't read these books, this is a little spoilerish, but read them anyway. You're going to enjoy yourself. He's doing some kind of shady things, and he's kind of found out. And then in Pilate's Key, there's there's pirates, basically. I don't mean like, "Arr, pirates," but they're like, it's the Bahamian. He's called the Bahamian. He's a guy from the Bahamas, and there's drugs and there's stuff like that. He's all right. He's a little bit of a cutout. I'll admit that. And then Ghost, we have a guy come back who could be somebody we've heard of before, and he's just off the rails crazy and doing some crazy stuff. So I like him a lot. Then in Blood, because it goes from Nebraska in the first book to Key West in the second book, and then in Pilate's Ghost, he's in both places. And then in Pilate's Blood, Pilate is firmly back in Cross Township, and he's like the constable, and he's dealing with the guy who filled the vacuum from the mayor, because the mayor also was evil in the first book, was the antagonist.
Right.
And he ended up, I'll just say, he ends up gone, but the vacuum is filled by this guy who's related to him. He comes in from the Minnesota Mafia, and I like him a lot because he's very nuanced. He's a businessman. His name is Hilmer Thurman. I like him a lot. He's probably the least. God, I'll use the word. He's probably the least cartoony of the villains. And when I say cartoony, I don't mean like, oh, haha, these are terrible villains. It's just, or here I go, I called them villains, antagonists. But Jack Lindstrom is like, okay, clearly, businessman, does some things that are shady, blah, blah, blah. Then you got the drug dealer in the next book, and then you got this shadowy guy who has connections back to Pilate's Cross, and then you got the Hilmer Thurman who's filling in for the mayor who was taken out in Pilate's Cross. And I like him. There's a scene where Pilate and him meet at like this. There's this rib joint that's being run. It's on the edge of town. It's the Rib Shack, or maybe it's at the Brown Betty Bar. It's at one of these places, and then Hilmer Thurman has just this little. Because if you see a lot of this stuff, you see a lot of these crime bosses, and they don't have opulent offices or anything. They live in a little tiny place because they don't want to draw attention themselves.
Sure.
Yeah, most successful criminals are successful because they don't draw attention themselves. They don't flash money around or that. Pilate has a scene with him, and Pilate is so nervous. I think his leg is just like constant movement leg syndrome under the desk, and he's sweating, and they're back and forthing, and he kind of threatens or he kind of insults this guy, and the guy, he gives it back to him, and there's no yelling at all. It's all just. So I really like Hilmer. And in Rose, it's kind of complicated. The villain in Rose is kind of like a James Bond villain to a degree. He's all right.
Some of these are maybe inspired loosely on a person or multiple people that you've known, you've interacted with.
Sure.
But you throw them into maybe an extreme situation, or right. have them make a bad decision or a series of bad decisions to get them where they are. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
So given that. Has anyone that's ever seen a bit of themselves in those characters been offended?
Not that they've said to me.
Okay.
I think indirectly somebody, back at Peru, and I couldn't tell you if this was just hearsay or what, but it kind of got back to me. Somebody was like, oh, really? I think some people who have glanced at these, who live in that area, are not flattered that, again, it's obvious that it's inspired by Peru, and maybe they're not thrilled with that because it's more salt in the wound kind of thing. But I've not heard anybody go,
believe you made me into this bad guy.
This bad guy. I think, have I? Gosh, I probably have had. I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but I mean, I would be probably more flattered than anything, because that means somebody really read it carefully. And most people don't. They're just like, that was a good book, man. Like, what'd you like about it? All of it.
Right.
I'm like,
right.
Yeah, okay. You didn't really read it, did you?
I wanted to ask you about the name John Pilate. How did John get his name?
Okay, I gotta say, it's been a regret of mine because it's Pontius Pilate is the inspiration. I'll tell you that first, and I'll tell you about the regret.
Okay, sure.
So Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor who got the unenviable job to placate the Jews and also deal with this problematic guy called Jesus. Then there was a lot of Jewish people there who wanted him out, and there was a lot of Romans who were like, can we just,
Done with
and
it. Right.
Pilate I don't think Pilate had any skin in that game. He was just like, I'm the governor. There's that famous line where he's like, I'm gonna wash my hands of this, and he's washing his hands. But I liked the idea of using religious imagery throughout the books, and I have to a degree. It's kind of dropped off here and there, but my editor and I were working on this new book. It comes back. I like the idea of religious imagery. There's a lot of threes in my books. Father, Son, Holy Ghost. If you kind of parallel to threes, if you look for threes hard enough, you're going to find it in just about every book. That's why originally, by the way, this was supposed to just be a trilogy, but it didn't happen that way. So now it's double that so far. I like the idea though that Pilate was a guy who got dragged into something. Because if you look at the entire character arc of John Pilate, he just gets dragged into stuff. Right.
There's he doesn't intentionally go to look for these for trouble or to solve things.
No, he's the guy in the first book who was coming off a very bad divorce, lost his job. He had some kind of potential life-threatening illness, and he goes to a new town. He's just like, I want a fresh start. And what's he get when he gets in the fresh start? He gets dragged into a conspiracy, and he nearly gets killed. And then if you look at all of these, Pilate's Key, he's just having dinner at a restaurant, and a dead man almost literally falls in his lap.
Right.
And so Pontius Pilate to me represents that kind of person who's just like, look, I don't want any trouble, but he gets it.
Right.
But the problem is Pilate, Pilate, everybody thinks it's an exercise class.
Pilates.
I can't tell how many people who've come up to me, like at a book signing, said, Pilates cross, I really enjoy. I'm like, thanks, hey. Just, by the way, also Pilate. Well, Pilate's spelled Pilot. I had this conversation, believe it or not. And I said, no, he's not I said, technically, I guess you could read Pilate into it, that he's charting, he's flying, but not really. I said, no, like, you ever studied the Bible? Pilate, the guy. And sometimes people I watch their eyes and they're just like, I don't, what? But it's fine. But I got to the point where on the John Pilate Mysteries Facebook page, I even put on the About section, I said, just to be helpful, it's pronounced, and there's a little pronunciation key.
Pilate, yeah.
It's been that, but what am I going to do? I can't change it.
Right.
I think though the next series character is going to be like Smith.
Something a little easier to pronounce. Something
just simple. And of course, a great name, Smith or Jones. You can write anything into that too. But it's fine. It's fine.
I did want to ask you a little bit about, I'll use the term the mysterious, but it's not a mystery. That you have a love for the mysterious.
I do. Yeah.
Personally. And then within your books, you will weave in maybe some local legend. You talked about weaving in the supernatural or religious, as well as maybe a little bit of the unexplained. Why do you find that important as a writer?
It's funny because, in Pilate's Cross, there's, and by the way, there's, throughout the books, there's a lot of pop culture stuff in there. There's lines. I mean, I think we're going to need a bigger boat in Pilate's Key when they're being chased. And I mentioned things like Kolchak, the Night Stalker series. He Pilate's interior monologue in Pilate's Cross that gets mentioned because I think that was something growing up I was drawn to. I love Halloween. I still do. I loved scary shows. I still do. And I think it was something that my mom actually kind of didn't have a problem with me getting into. She at times would stay up late nights and she'd have the TV going and she didn't really care what was on. I don't think. She was kind of doing her own thing and I would be up. And I remember watching reruns of The Night Stalker. I remember watching scary stuff and she didn't discourage it. But I've always also just thought, God, life is so much more interesting when it doesn't play by the rules. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, there's all these rules about time and space and gravity and all that stuff. Fine. But the idea though that there's something that defies that, it's kind of a joke, but not. But I'd like to believe that Bigfoot is real.
Sure.
Because most science says it's probably not, but a lot of science says it could be. And if it is real, it means anything's possible to a degree to me. Ghosts. Right. I don't know about ghosts. I don't know if it's for real. I don't know if people are having psychosis. I don't know if it's some kind of energy echo, but I hope it's real somehow. I don't know if I hope that
and not necessarily it's that it's ghosts, but that there are just things, unexplained things that happen and that we see and that we experience, and we can't come up with a logical answer for.
Right, the things that don't play by our set rules, or at least the rules today. But think about the things that were the rules until the rules changed. Think about all the different. Think about Einstein before Einstein. Then he changed the rules. Hawking has changed the rules to a degree, but there used to be so many rules about medicine and things like that. So
right.
I like that idea, and I don't put it in Pilate series much. There's a touch of it, but I do talk about it, and I do couch him in sometimes those situations, those kind of dark situations. Or one of my favorite things I ever wrote was kind of a rundown of all the weird stuff about Key West, like in the first or second chapter.
Yeah, and so that was one thing I wanted to maybe dive into is so each of the books, I think you will throw John into a local area and then weave in some local legend that may, if nothing else, add color to the conversation and add kind of a mental visual to what the people are like in an area. So
we are, as a people, we are our legends too. And if in Key West, there's all these weird things that have happened. Like there was a guy who fell in love back in the day, like in the turn of the last century. He fell in love with this beautiful young woman. He was an older man, a doctor or something, a little approaching a doctor. I don't remember. Count von Kossel, I believe, was his name. And he fell in love with this girl. And, he was like 30 years older than her, and she didn't want anything to do with him. But then she got TB. And shortly before she died, she went ahead and married him, I think maybe out of a financial thing for her family. And long story short, and you can read the book, there's more about it, but family soon realized she's missing from her tomb. Because everybody in Key West is buried above ground because, right? And she had a little tomb. Well, they eventually find her mummified corpse. And the Count had been sleeping with his wife in more ways than one for a long time. And I mean, that kind of, thing, because there's that saying, all the nuts roll downhill to Florida, and so you have that, and then you have just all these creepy things that have happened, and I just think that those, again, not playing by the rules things informs the story, and it fires the imagination, and it makes it more interesting. I really, really hope that life is more interesting than daily life, because daily life is boring, and daily life is not interesting.
So for the books, do you put John in an interesting locale and then research the legends, or does a legend that you stumble upon inspire you to have Pilate travel there?
Well, okay, Cross is kind of an obvious one. I stumbled upon, and I also lived there, and I've always been intrigued by the small town mystery and creepy thing. But Key, as I mentioned last episode, my wife and I spent part of our honeymoon there in Key West. And so then I took a tour there, and I got to know the place. So it was kind of both.
Sure.
And Ghost, that covers Ghost. But then in Rose, Pilate's Rose, Jamaica, which, by the way, you were with me on the trip to our families.
I was indeed.
Yeah, so that was there. So then I did do a little bit there, but I got a little over my skis with that one, and I was really trying to really flesh it out and make the Jamaica parts bigger than it needed to be, and my editor saved me, because that Rose was a torturous book to finish for me. It wasn't going anywhere. And so we got through that. So I think that's the case. And the next book, which we'll mention before we go, is coming out on Halloween. It takes place totally in Key West again. The good news is I had recently visited Antigua, and I've got some other places that are on my list. So Pilate will probably go to some of those places too.
Interesting. So you mentioned another potential Pilate book after this. I mean, do you see a finite end book?
I do.
For the Pilate series,
or
would you just kind of stop writing when it stops inspiring you?
I would hope I would stop if it was just getting really terrible. Like if it was like, oh my God, he's just ticking the boxes and blah, blah, blah. And I was afraid that was happening a little bit, to be honest with you, with Rose, because I was really really forcing it because I hadn't put anything out in a while. And I literally have a couple of fans who contact me and say, I have one lady, Miss Tony, she calls me about every 6 months, when's the next book coming? She's got my number.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So so I was like, oh, I got to get this done. But I don't like the term blocked. I just felt like I was having an imagination deficit, and I was feeling like I was like, I don't have anything more to say here. But anyway, I've got a number in mind, and we're halfway through. Basically, we're getting over the Terminator to the next second half of the series. At the rate I'm writing these, though, I'll be just into my 60s when I'm done.
Okay.
And I think by then it probably will be a good time. But Pilate kind of ages with me. He's a few years younger than me, but he ages as we move along here. He doesn't say the same age. But I'll make a promise to readers: if it really sucks, I won't put it out. And if I keep putting them out and people just stop reading them or reviewing or commenting, then I'll know.
Sure.
I'll know.
Right,
Somebody will let me know, and they'll take me out behind the woodshed and do that last act that I need, with the one bullet type thing, and say, good dog, bye bye.
Awesome. So with your upcoming book, so it's coming out on Halloween
2019, right?
So is there anything else about the plot, the location, that you'd like to share early?
Just to let you know, the book, let me just tell you what this is. This is a way, we were going to do a big omnibus edition. We're going to put a 2-volume printed set of everything, including this new adventure, together. And it was purely a dollars and cents thing where it was going to cost me a lot to put it together. And I still want to do it someday, but I just want to wait a little bit longer, maybe our 10 or 20 years after that. Yeah, maybe when we're finally done with all of it, I'll put out a big slipcover, multi. But I had a great friend. He's a fellow author. He also helps with my ideas when I get dry, and he does great book covers for me, Jason McIntyre. And he and I were talking, and I said, I want to do this omnibus, but I just can't pull it all together, and it's going to be money that I'm not sure I have, and I don't want to do another Kickstarter like I did for Pilate's Ghost, which was very successful, but I'm at a point where it's just like, I don't want to have hat in hand and expect people to, money's tight for people, and I don't want people to feel boxed in. So, because if people want to buy my stuff, they can buy it. So he said, well, how about this? Why don't you just take the new story, because I'd got the new story done, and it was not quite a full book. It's a novella size,
Okay.
It's several thousand, it's up there, but it's not it's not like the usual 60,000 word book at all. It's like about 15 or something. Why not tuck that in at the back of the last Pilate book of Pilate's Rose and call it a 10th anniversary special edition? And featuring the new story, which, by the way, is called Pilate's Shadow.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice reveal.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for setting me up on that. And Pilate's Shadow is going to be at the back of Pilate's Rose. So what's going to happen is it's going to be out, by the time you hear this, it's going to be available on Halloween, and it's paperback only. Okay? So if you go to Kindle and buy Pilate's Rose on Kindle looking for this story, it's not going to be in there right away, okay? In fact, we'll probably only release this special edition probably as a print only. I would like you to buy the paperback. Pricing and everything will be on Amazon. There'll be an announcement on mgopod.com before Halloween about that. This ebook, the ebook version of just this story will come out probably next year. So if you want to wait, but I'd rather you didn't. And it's not a guarantee, by the way. So you want to buy you want to buy the book. Okay.
Buy the book.
Pilate Shadow, though, is Key West, but it's a tiny portion of Key West. It's a very intimate story with Pilate. It catches up within weeks of the ending of Pilate's Rose, which, as we all know, if you've read Pilate's Rose ended in a strange spot where you weren't sure whether he was going to live or die or come back or not. Well, obviously he does. John does. And we meet a new antagonist. And I don't want to give too much away. It's a quick read, but I want you to know I'm very proud of it. And I think that if you're a Pilate fan, it's must read. It's must read. And if you're not a Pilate fan, it's still a damn good read, in my opinion. Oops.
Awesome. So, want to again thank you for for letting me turn the tables and letting us,
Are you kidding me? I should pay you for this. Thank you.
Take a little peek behind the scenes and your process, because but it's very interesting. I mean, it's very it's. I think there are some parallels to what I do on the product side, but also some very unique things that you do.
Well, I appreciate that. And, because I understand your process. And if you haven't listened to the episode with Brian, go back. It's the Restaurant's Invisible Man. Ultimately, process is inspiration, just like you. But then it's also what you do. It's get your butt in the seat. And like for you, it's sketching or whatever you do and research. For me, it's research. It's writing, butt in seat writing. I have so many writers like, oh, I want to do this. I have a book in me, but blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, you're never going to get it done unless you get your butt in the seat. You turn off the noise and you just write. So that's what I do. And this is one of the few times when I'm ever being interviewed, so I just want to say this to everybody. I'm deeply indebted to all of you readers, all of you listeners to the show. A lot of you listeners to the show probably don't even read the books. I know a couple of you don't or haven't. Hope you will. But the thing is, I'm deeply indebted to you because, like my grandfather, he never had great riches. He had success as a writer, and I've had some success, but I don't have great riches. But that's not really why I do it, and that's not a cliche. It's true. I do it because I like to express myself. I like to entertain other people, and you all make it really worthwhile. And as long as you're reading, I'm still writing.
Awesome. So again, 10th anniversary of the Pilate series and the new book, Pilate's Shadow. Coming out in paperback on Halloween, October 31st, 2019.
Very scary, kids.
Yeah, thanks again, Alex. And it's, as always, a pleasure to speak with you, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So until next time, you'll be back in this seat. Keep reading.
Whiteout conditions. I haven't seen a blizzard like this in 50 years. You'd have to be crazy to go outside tonight.
Small towns keep their secrets, sometimes for decades, until an outsider dares to ask questions.
The president of Cross College was assassinated by a professor who turned the gun on himself in November 1963. Why?
Well, that's a $64,000 question, isn't it?
When John Pilate moved to faraway Cross Township, he left behind a life he was eager to forget. His new job at Cross College would be a quiet place to rebuild his life, or so he thought. Sometimes small towns reveal more than secrets to outsiders, and what was meant to be simple can easily become complicated.
John, I want to be with you, but I don't think you're going to stay at Cross for long.
And a mystery can be as powerful and irresistible as love.
There's something going on here, and it's all tied to the murder of the Cross College president in 1963.
John, it's not your concern. You really don't fit in here. For your own sake, get out of Cross while you can.
And Pilate may self-destruct on his own if his imaginary pal Simon gets his way.
Why not end this? Escape this veil of tears, shovel off this mortal coil, take the dirt now. Of all the imaginary friends in the world, I have to get the psycho who wants me dead. Everyone needs a hobby.
The small town of Cross gets smaller as Pilate zeroes in on the decades-old conspiracy.
What happens to a person's ashes if nobody claims them?
And makes himself a target. Ultimately, this outsider will have to survive the elements, outsmart the conspirators, and overcome his personal demons. John Pilate will learn that washing his hands of murder isn't easy,